He didn't think twice about what he was starting when he handed me that envelope. He was 53 years old, retired military, the kind of man who kept his lawn edged and his handshake firm and his voice just low enough that you leaned in without realizing you were doing it. His son was 31. My boyfriend of 2 years. And that envelope, cream-coloured, thick, sealed with the kind of weight that only comes when someone has thought very carefully about how much your silence is worth, sat on my kitchen counter for 4 minutes before I touched it. I didn't open it right away. I just looked at it. I already knew what was inside. Not the exact number, but I knew. I should back up. My name is Vivian. I was 28 when this started, working as a pediatric occupational therapist at a children's clinic outside of Columbus, Ohio. I am not dramatic. I am not someone who looks for conflict. I drove a used Subaru with a cracked passenger mirror for 2 years before I got around to fixing it. I bring this up because I want you to understand exactly the kind of person I was before any of this happened. Someone who avoided confrontation the way other people avoid gluten. Someone who said no worries when there were in fact worries. My boyfriend, I'll call him by what his family called him, which was Junior, was everything that looked right on paper. He coached youth baseball on weekends. He called his mother on Sundays. He remembered the names of my patients when I talked about work, which almost no one does. We had been together since the night we both ended up at the same going-away party for a mutual friend, and he had walked me to my car afterward and then stood there in the parking lot talking for an hour and a half about absolutely nothing important, and I had thought, this one is kind. He was kind. I want to be clear about that. What happened later was not about cruelty on his part, it was about fear. And fear in a person who has been raised by a man who solves everything with money is a very specific, very dangerous thing. His father. I'll call him the commander, because that is how Junior referred to him in a way that was half joking and entirely not. Had retired from the Navy after 26 years, and then spent the following decade building a real estate investment portfolio that, by the time I entered the picture, was worth somewhere between $8 and $12 million depending on the market. He lived 40 minutes outside Columbus on a property with a fence that needed no gate, because no one came uninvited. He had opinions about everything. College majors, retirement accounts, neighborhoods, women. I had met him 3 times before any of this. Each time he shook my hand like he was assessing it. Each time he asked me questions that sounded polite and landed like tests. Once he asked me what I thought about buying versus renting, and when I said I was still figuring that out, he smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes and said, "Good to be realistic about your limitations." Junior laughed it off afterward. "That's just how he is," he said. "He does that with everyone." I filed it away. I was good at filing things. I found out I was pregnant in October. 9 weeks along, completely unplanned, completely real, and when I sat on the edge of my bathtub holding that test, my first feeling was not panic. It was something quieter than that, something that felt, against all logic, like recognition. Like this was already decided. I told Junior that evening. He went very still in the way that people go, still when something has moved inside them that they can't show you yet. He held my hand. He said he needed time to think. I said okay. I meant it. He called me 2 days later and said he thought we should figure this out together, and that he loved me and that he was scared, but he was in. I believed him. I had no reason not to. 3 weeks after that I got the envelope. I was alone when it arrived. Junior was not there. His father had arranged it that way. I would learn later. Came to my apartment while Junior was at work, rang my doorbell, handed it to me with the same expression he used for everything, and said, "I think you'll find this more than fair." Inside was a cashier's check for $80,000. There was no note, no letter, no conditions written out in language I could argue with, just the check and a business card for a women's health clinic, and a second card for a family law attorney I had never heard of. I set everything back on the counter, laid it out flat, like I was arranging evidence, and then I sat down on my kitchen floor, not dramatically, not in collapse, just because the floor was right there and I needed to be low for a minute, and I thought very carefully about what this moment actually was. This was not an offer. This was an assumption. The commander had assumed that I had a price. that the right number would make me make a choice that suited his family's timeline, that I was the kind of problem that could be solved with a cashier's check and 2 business cards. I stayed on that floor for maybe 10 minutes, then I got up. I washed my hands. I called my older sister in Pittsburgh, the one who had gone through her own custody situation 6 years earlier, and came out the other side like someone who had been through a fire and stopped being afraid of heat. And I said, "I need the name of your attorney." She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Write this down. I want to tell you what I did not do, because I think it matters." I did not call Junior and scream at him. I did not confront the commander. I did not post anything. I did not tell my co-workers or my mother or anyone except my sister. I did not cash the check. I did not throw it away either because my sister had said, "Keep everything, all of it. You're going to want a paper trail." I kept it in a manila envelope in the back of my filing cabinet, between my lease agreement and my car insurance documents, which felt appropriate. I went to work. I ate breakfast. I took my prenatal vitamins. I had an appointment with my OBGYN at 11 on a Thursday morning where we confirmed that everything was measuring exactly as it should, and I sat in that office listening to a heartbeat that sounded like a question I had already answered, and I felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, completely calm. The next morning I met with my attorney. Her name was Denise Kraft. She had been practicing family law in Ohio for 19 years. She wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in the kind of measured, unhurried way that told you she had seen worse than your situation and had still won. She looked at the cashier's check, the business cards, the envelope. She asked me 4 questions. She wrote down my answers. Then she looked up and said, "He made the first move. We're going to make the last one. Here is what I learned from Denise that I did not know before. In Ohio, a child's right to financial support from both parents is protected by state law, regardless of the relationship status of the parents. Child support is calculated based on both parents' income, but in cases involving significant assets, the court looks beyond W-2 income. It looks at investment income, property holdings, business distributions. A man with an $8 to $12 million real estate portfolio does not get to claim a modest income when a child's support is being calculated. I also learned that paternity can be established voluntarily or through the courts, and that once a child support order is in place, it is very difficult to walk away from, regardless of who your father is, or how many calls he makes, or how many attorneys he retains. Denise filed the initial paperwork before I was 14 weeks along. She told me the timing mattered. She told me that in cases involving family wealth, it was common for the other side to attempt to delay, to intimidate, to offer private settlements that looked generous until you understood what you were giving up. She told me we were not going to let that happen. Junior called me the night after he was served. His voice was something I had not heard from him before. Not angry, not cold, just emptied out, like someone had taken something from him and he wasn't sure what it was yet. "You could have just talked to me," he said. "I did talk to you," I said. "You said you were in, then your father sent me a check." Silence. "I didn't know he was going to do that," he said. "I know," I said, "and I meant that too. The commander's attorney, a man whose suits cost more than my monthly rent, called Denise within the week. He was very smooth, very reasonable sounding. He had a counter-proposal," he said. "A private agreement, structured payments, a college fund in the child's name. Very generous. Very discreet." Denise listened to the whole thing. She took notes. She said she would discuss it with her client. Then she called me and said, "Their first offer is always the lowest, and this one has strings attached that would limit modification in the future. I recommend we decline and let the court set the terms." I said, "Okay." She said, "You're sure? Because once we go this route, there's no quiet version of this anymore." I thought about the cashier's check in my filing cabinet. I thought about the way the commander had stood at my door and said, "I think you'll find this more than fair," with the complete confidence of someone who had never once been wrong about what something was worth. "I'm sure," I said. "The hearing was in March. I was 22 weeks pregnant. I wore a navy blazer and the same low heels I had worn to every professional presentation since graduate school, because I had learned early that the right shoes make you stand straighter. Junior came with his own attorney, a different one from his father's. He looked tired. He looked like someone who had been in a very long argument that wasn't even really about him. The commander was not there. His attorney was. That told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking this, which was seriously enough to send representation, but not seriously enough to come himself. That would change, I would find out later. What happened in that hearing was not dramatic in the way you might expect. There were no outbursts, no theatrical moments. Denise laid out the documentation, Junior's income, the asset disclosures, the evidence of the commander's involvement, the cashier's check, the business cards. She made her argument clearly and without flourish, and the judge, a woman in her 50s who looked like she had heard every version of this story and was not interested in any nonsense, listened with the kind of attention that made the room feel very, very quiet. Junior's attorney argued that support should be based solely on Junior's individual income. Denise pointed out that the commander had already inserted himself into this matter financially, and that the court should be aware of the full financial context of the child's paternity family. The judge set a temporary support order that day. It was more than 3 times what the commander's side had offered in their private settlement. I did not smile. I looked straight ahead and I thought about the heartbeat I had heard in the OBGYN's office at 11 weeks, the one that had sounded like a question I had already answered. I should tell you about the part that no one prepares you for. The months between that first hearing and the final order were long, not in a dramatic way. In a quiet, grinding, everything costs money and time and energy way. I was working full-time. I was pregnant. I was paying an attorney. I was fielding calls from Junior's family, his mother, polite and anxious, trying to find a middle ground that didn't exist yet. His aunt, less polite, making it clear that she felt I was being difficult. My mother came down from Akron for a month, when I was 8 months along, and stayed in my second bedroom and cooked dinners I didn't ask for but desperately needed. She didn't say much about the legal situation. She asked about my patients, my prenatal appointments, whether I was sleeping. She folded my laundry without commenting on the pile of legal documents on my dining room table. One night she sat down across from me while I was going through paperwork and she said, "You know you don't have to prove anything to anybody." I looked up. "I know," I said. "Okay," she said, "just checking." My daughter was born in May, 6 pounds 11 ounces. She had Junior's nose and my stubbornness, which I recognised immediately and felt completely unprepared for. I called her Wren after no one in particular, just because it was a name I had been holding quietly since January, and it had never felt wrong. Junior was there at the hospital. We had reached a kind of careful, wary peace by then, the kind that forms between 2 people who are no longer in love but are tied together permanently by something they both, in different ways, love completely. He held her for a long time. He cried a little, which surprised me. He looked at me over the top of her head and said, "I'm sorry about all of it." "I know," I said. 3rd time I'd said that to him. The final support order came through 7 weeks after Wren was born. Denise called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the parking lot of the grocery store, Wren asleep in her car seat, a list on my phone of things I needed that I kept forgetting to buy. "The order is finalized," she said. She gave me the number. It was based on a full accounting of Junior's income, investment distributions from the family holdings in which he had a documented beneficial interest, and a contribution to a separately administered college savings account. It would be revisited at age 4 and age 8. It was, Denise said, one of the more complete orders she had seen come through in a case like this. I sat in the parking lot for a minute after I hung up. The grocery store's automatic doors kept opening and closing with the mechanical indifference of a thing that has no idea what just happened nearby. I thought about the commander. About the cream-coloured envelope. About the way he had said, "I think you'll find this more than fair," as if fairness was something he got to define. The court had disagreed. I want to be honest about what this was and wasn't. It was not revenge. I don't lie awake feeling victorious. What happened was not satisfying in the way that stories are supposed to be satisfying, where the villain gets humiliated publicly and the hero rides off into clarity. Real life doesn't do that. What happened is that my daughter has a legally protected financial future. What happened is that I stood in a situation that was designed to make me feel small and powerless, and I did not accept the terms I was handed. What happened is that a man who was very certain that money was the same as power learned in a courtroom in Columbus, Ohio, that those are not the same thing. Junior is present in Wren's life. He shows up for the things he said he would show up for. He's trying in the particular, imperfect way of someone who is building something he didn't know he wanted until it was already there. We communicate through a shared app, which is easier than it sounds. Some weeks are harder than others. Most weeks are just weeks. The commander has never spoken to me since. He has met Wren twice. Junior brought her to a family event when she was 9 months old, and by all accounts the commander held her for a while and was quieter than usual for the rest of the afternoon. I don't know what he thought about in those moments. I don't spend much time wondering. What I think about instead is this. When I was sitting on my kitchen floor that October evening, right after I'd opened that envelope, there was a version of me that could have made a different choice. Not because of the money. $80,000 is not nothing, but it was not enough to rebuild a life around, and I knew that even then. But because of what the envelope represented, which was an exit from something hard and uncertain and frightening, I didn't take it. Not because I was brave. I don't think bravery is the right word for what it takes to refuse a thing when the alternative terrifies you. I think the right word is stubborn. I think the right word is clear. I was clear. Wren is 2 now. She says about 40 words and has a very strong opinion about which socks she wears and will eat exactly 3 foods without negotiating. She wakes up in the morning in a way that suggests she finds the whole project of being alive extremely interesting, which is, I think, the best thing a person can be. I don't know what I would tell her about all of this when she's old enough to ask. I think I would tell her that someone once tried to hand me an envelope and a decision that wasn't theirs to make, and I put the envelope in a filing cabinet, and I made my own. That's all. That's the whole story. I've thought a lot about what actually caused all of this. Not in a bitter way, more like the way you trace a crack in a wall back to where it started, just to understand the structure. The commander was a man who had spent decades in a world where rank decided outcomes. You give an order, the order is followed. You apply enough pressure, the situation resolves. And when that stopped working in a courtroom in Columbus, Ohio, I don't think he was angry so much as genuinely confused. He had done the math the only way he knew how, and the math had come back wrong. That's what happens when you mistake wealth for authority. They feel the same from the inside, I imagine. But they aren't. What I keep coming back to is the moment on my kitchen floor. Not as a low point. I want to be careful about that, because I don't think it was. I think it was actually the moment I got honest with myself about what I was willing to accept, and the answer, once I sat still long enough to hear it, was not this, not an envelope, not a number someone else decided was sufficient, not a version of my daughter's life that started with her being treated as a problem to be managed. That clarity. I didn't earn it by being exceptional. I earned it by being stubborn enough to stay on that floor until I found it. And then I stood up, and I did the next thing, and then the next thing after that. That's the part no one tells you about when they talk about standing your ground. It isn't one big dramatic moment. It's 100 small, unglamorous ones. It's calling your sister. It's keeping the envelope as evidence. It's showing up to a hearing at 22 weeks pregnant in the shoes that make you stand straighter, because the shoes matter when everything else feels uncertain. Wren doesn't know any of this yet. She's 2. Her current preoccupations are socks and whether her crackers are the right shape. But someday she'll be old enough to understand that before she was born, someone tried to decide her worth for her, and someone else disagreed. I want her to understand both sides of that sentence equally. Not just that she was fought for, but that the way you fight matters. I didn't win because I was loud or because I performed my pain for anyone. I won because I stayed clear, because I found a person who knew the law better than the other side expected, because I understood that intelligence isn't just about being smart, it's about knowing which room to walk into and when. The commander taught me something he never intended to. He taught me that power applied without integrity will eventually run into a wall. It cannot buy its way through. Denise taught me that preparation is a form of courage. Junior, still trying, still showing up on the days he said he would, is teaching me that people can grow when the stakes are real enough. And Ren, every single morning, teaches me that the whole project of being alive is still, despite everything, extremely interesting. I'll take that. I'll take all of it.